So I'm going to start by first thanking everyone for being here. And I see that the chat box is active and folks are talking back and forth with each other, which I love. And I would just say that part of the reason why we do this is exactly for that, for you as writers to get to come together for some time once or twice a week through these webinars and get the chance to talk to each other. So I hope you'll keep chattering during and then also after. We'll leave a little time at the end. But I want to introduce myself. My name is Becca Oliver. I'm the Executive Director of the Writers League of Texas. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we're the largest literary arts organization in Texas, and we exist, we're a nonprofit, and we exist to support writers. So the way that we're doing that right now primarily is through offering programs like this, as many of them as we possibly can, and just making sure that we're continuing to foster community, offer craft tips, offer business of publishing knowledge, and just keep people moving forward in whatever way they want to or are able to right now in their writing. So that's what we're here to do tonight. We're going to talk about editing and revising. But first, I'm going to tell you about a few things that are coming up. So let me go to my little slideshow. So we do have a class coming up next Saturday. We don't have a class this weekend, but we have an online class with Charlotte Gulick. If anyone has ever met Charlotte, I'm sure you can testify to how wonderful she is. And she's also just one of the most gracious and giving instructors, and is someone who folks give wild praise and reviews to whenever she teaches a class. So she's doing a class, an online class for us next Saturday, the 18th, called Better Prose Through Poetry. So she's going to talk to you about writing prose. Sorry, guys, just skipped ahead. About writing prose, whether it's short stories or essays or long form fiction or nonfiction, but really looking at the ways that poetry, certain tools or concepts that poetry uses that might help you. So if you're interested, check out our website. You can register for that class. And then next Thursday is our third Thursday. So every third Thursday of the month, we typically have an event at BookPeople, and we have moved it online. So this will be our second time doing a third Thursday on Zoom, and this one is called Getting Personal, Writing Personal Essays and Memoir. And we have Charlotte Gulick again, fan favorite, and then also Antonio Ruiz Camacho, who is a really terrific writer, journalist, short story writer, and a great teacher. He actually just did a free craft presentation for us that's up on our YouTube now, I believe, that is about writing personal essays. So if you're available next Thursday, I hope that you'll check it out. And there is an RSVP so that we can make sure we send you the link. So go to our website or reach out to us if you want more information on that. And then I'll just mention again, as we do every time we do one of these, because we are pretty proud of it, we have a great podcast that has a lot of terrific recordings of those kinds of conversations that we do at our third Thursday. So if you're looking for something to do and you actually want to turn off some screens for a while and, I don't know, do some dishes or just walk around your neighborhood or whatever feels right for you right now, consider checking out our podcast, Writers League of Texas. And then finally, we do have a lot of videos that we've been uploading on YouTube, and we would encourage you to go there and see if there's something for you. So the last thing I'll say is that, of course, feel free to use the chat box and ask questions throughout if you'd like to. If you ask a question, I'll be taking note of it. I'll either offer it to Stacey at that point, or I'll hold on to some questions till the end. But just remember, and I think everyone's doing a great job so far tonight, that you want to select all panelists and attendees if you want everybody who is here to see your question or your comment. If you want to send something just to me and Stacey, you can select all panelists, and we will feel honored that you are directing it directly to us. But we encourage you to share it with everyone. So if you have any questions pertaining to what we're talking about at that moment, absolutely throw them in the chat box and we'll make every effort to answer them. And so here we are. Thanks for being here, everyone. So Ask Us Anything is something that we've been doing for a little while now. I think this is our third time doing it. And the idea being that it's less of a really prepared presentation and more about just answering as many questions as we can on a specific topic, but also just giving you a little time at the end to ask questions outside of that topic if you have anything else that you want to know about. So this is actually our first time bringing a celebrity onto the show. So the last time we did it, it was me last week talking about query letters, and we've done it with staff members in the past. But we thought, let's talk about a topic that I think is one that a lot of people are thinking about right now, because it's certainly something we could be doing with a little bit of our time, but also is one that we're thinking about all the time as writers, and that is editing and revising, or revising and editing, depending on how you want to put it. So we invited Stacey Swann because she's not only a really terrific instructor, she's also someone who's got years of experience doing editorial work with clients directly. So she's a terrific editor, but she's also got a book that's coming out, and I'm going to ask her to tell us a little more about it. And she's been going through this process herself, first on the, as a writer, and then as a writer working with an agent and continuing to get the material into the best shape possible. And then as a writer who is now, working with a publisher and an editor inside that publishing house who's continuing to give her notes and help her shape the project. So she's got a lot of perspective, and I'm excited for her to share it with us. So without further ado, we're going to get in. So you guys sent in a lot of questions ahead of time, and I think that the way I'd love to jump off is I've sort of put them in different categories, topics that you were asking about, and I thought we'd start just knowing that we're gonna talk about editing and revising with Stacey talking to us a little bit first about herself and kind of giving us an introduction, talking about her own experience with editing and revising. And then we're going to let you answer the question, what's the difference between editing and revising? But first, you jump in and share a little bit about yourself. So thank you, Stacey, for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Becca. It's wonderful to be here. And I, as you were talking, I made a note to myself that I need to look up your YouTube channel to find Antonio's talk on the personal essay, because that's something I don't know how to write very well and would like to know how to write better and work on that more. So excited to do that. And thanks for everybody for hanging out with us tonight. This is really nice. I've been a big fan of all the stuff the Writers League is doing. All right, so for me, I did not really start doing any revision of any kind until my third year of grad school, because, and this is including like papers in college and papers in high school and just regular writing, I never revised because I'm a procrastinator. And so I would always wait until the night before a paper was due, and then I would write it. And so I never had a chance to revise any of those things. And luckily I was a good enough writer naturally that I didn't fail all my classes as a result. But I got into grad school, and we have workshop every week. I got my MFA at Texas State down in San Marcos. And I was just writing news stories for the first 2 years I was even in grad school. And so I didn't have to revise anything until I hit my third year, which is when you're working with your thesis advisor. And, you give them all the short stories or the novel that you've been working on while you're there, and they give you feedback. And over the course of not quite 2 semesters, you work with them and revise your work. And it was a horrifying experience for me. I remember working really hard on a revision for a story, going to my thesis advisor and having her tell me, at least this is my memory of it, that I had made the story worse in revision. And I was like, oh no, I don't know how to do this. I've never done this. And maybe this means that I can't even be a writer, because I knew enough to know that if you can't revise your work, you're not really going to ever get to that level where things get published, that revision is more important. Revision is really the most important part of writing. I think now, and I knew that then. So it was a very painful final year, but I slowly got a little better. And then I went after that to Stanford Stegner Fellowship Program. I worked a lot more on revision there, had even more workshops, more people giving me feedback, and slowly I did get better at it. But what was also happening at the same time as I was working on my own stuff and learning how to revise my own stuff, I was working for American Short Fiction, the literary journal. So I started off as a volunteer there. And then I worked my way up to managing editor. So I started at that point, not just reading the stories that came in, but being one of the people kind of secondary to the main editor who would help the writer revise once we'd accepted their stories and for publication in American Short Fiction. And then a bit after that, I became editor and spent then additional 2 years as editor. All that time getting to work with writers, some emerging, we were publishing people, it was their very first story, and then some much more established. So probably the most famous person I got to edit was Joyce Carol Oates. So that was really exciting and strange, its own strange editing process, which maybe we'll have time to talk about later because I think it's funny.
It's probably a good story.
Yes, it's very interesting. And one thing that I think, and that was that experience then later that led me to become a kind of professional editor where I was like doing entire novel manuscripts as well as short stories. Because I really enjoyed it. I thought, in some ways, I thought maybe I was even a better editor than writer. Like I was more confident of my editing abilities. And I thought it was important. Like, I think it's great when you can, and I'm sure there are editors that can do this that do not think of themselves as writers, but when you are a writer that moves into editing, you understand what it is to work on your own work and for it to carry the meaning you want it to carry. And so author intent, whether I'm reading in a workshop for my classmates or my writing group, or whether I'm working with a client, I want to look at what the author intended and help them to convey that in the best way to the audience. Versus sometimes, and I know probably people have had this experience in maybe a workshop that wasn't, 100% stacked with people that were right in line with you and giving feedback, but it's really easy for us to want to read a story and want to make it the best story that we would write rather than the best story that this other person is trying to write. So a lot of what I think is, the kind of foundation of good editing is being able to look at a piece and try and figure out what it is the author's trying to say and then help them say that. Rather than saying, well, I think it would be more interesting if you said something completely different, because that never works. You can only write the book or the story that you're interested in. And if you were interested in writing it this other way, you would have done that in the first place. So I would say I've been writing for about 20 years now and editing for about 15. And they're both still things that I enjoy a lot of. And then I guess to just talk for a bit about my own process. Is that good, Becca? Should I talk about that now? So the novel that is forthcoming from Doubleday, so it's now, the pub date is estimated to be June of 2021, so a little more than a year from now. And I have been working on that novel since 2006. So a really, really long time. And it took me, I don't know, 6-8 years. I can't even remember now, just to finish the first draft. And of course, a lot of that time was spent completely ignoring the manuscript. And I'd work on something else or I wouldn't write at all. And then I finished a first draft. I revised that myself because, as I'm sure all of y'all listening know, in general, your first novel draft is like such a giant mess. It's really not ready for anyone to look at it because you were like, you have plot points that you just abandoned halfway through your novel, and you've changed your character's name 8 times over the course of the draft, and all sorts of things going on. So I did what would have been, I guess, a second draft, but no one had read the whole thing yet. And then I gave it to my wonderful writing group, of which Becca is a part of, actually, because I'm lucky that way. And I gave it to a few other of my writer friends from out of town. And at that point, I actually had an agent that I had been in communication with, and she offered to read that whole first version. So I got a bunch of feedback. So one of the main things that I will say as a writer, that for me, revision is impossible without outside eyes, whether that's, you know, your friends, family, writing group, or an editor that you pay. I just don't think that I can even conceive of exactly how my work is coming across to someone else without being in conversation with another person. So at every step, I find that outside feedback really important. So I did another revision. I sent it out to some new kind of beta readers that hadn't read it on the first draft, and that took, I think, about a year and a half. And then I got another set of feedback. I did another revision. That one was a quicker, less intensive one. That probably took me about 6 months, I think. And then at that point, I started querying agents. So, I mean, in some ways that sounds like 4 drafts, but the reality of that is there are parts of that novel that had gone through 80 drafts, right? Because the beginning I had worked on for so long, and so the revision didn't all come in neat, in, you know, separate, discrete stages. It was kind of ongoing for a long time. I got an agent because the agent that had looked at the first version, that wound up not working out. So I did another round of querying, and then I was prepared with, when I did get an agent, to do another pretty intensive revision before it went out to editors, but was pleasantly surprised that didn't have to happen. So we just did some light edits. She thought it was ready to go out. And so that only took a few weeks. And then since then, since we sold the book, which was fall of
19?
Was it 19 or 18? It's the fall of 2018.
Oh, geez. Feels like 100 years ago.
It is.
Feels like 100 years ago. Oh my gosh.
Which is why I keep making the joke that it perhaps really what's going on is that I'm locked in an eternal purgatory in which I am forced to just revise my novel over and over again for all eternity, because it's been since 2018 that I've been thinking about revision of this book. But so the bad news is that this has been a process that's taken a really long time, longer, I think, than the publishing house and editor expected either. The good news is that I have a wonderful editor who's incredible at her job, has spent an incredible amount of time on my book, which I'm always grateful for, and that I think that the book is getting better, you know, at each stage. So what happened when I sold the book was that she took a few months to do a full-scale edit of the novel, and she's old school, so it was all handwriting in the margins and then kind of like a big letter at the end. And then I had several months, maybe 4 months, I think, to do a full revision on all these different things. A lot of them were like characterization issues, character motive issues, but also a lot of pacing issues. There were some basic plot stuff. One of her big complaints was that my characters were always just having dinner with each other, because it's a family novel, so there's lots of there's older parents and grown children, and everybody was just having dinner with each other all the time, and she thought that was a little excessive. And so we worked on that. I sent it back, and for it to come out on its original pub date, which was supposed to be June of 2020, there was time to do another kind of small revision after she read it and give me another round of feedback, but we were supposed to really be moving forward. And when she came back to me, she said, I love the changes that you've done in the first half of the book. I think it's working really, really well, but I don't think the second half of the book is there yet, and that it still had some pacing problems. And so they said, we're going to push it, so you'll have more time to work on it. She gave me another round of feedback, but it was probably only on about 40% of the book, what she thought, you know, that section in the middle and towards the end. So then I did a whole nother second pretty substantial revision, you know, changed some subplots, did a lot of cutting. It's getting smaller each round, which is good because it was really big to begin with.
What was the word count when you started, and what is it going to be, do you think, when it's all done?
So the word count of the first enormous draft before I like gave it to anybody was between 130 and 140,000 words.
Wow.
Yeah. By the time I got it to Yell in the writing group, it was down to 115,000 words, I believe. Right now, as I work on edits, I've gotten it down to 98,000 words. And I think when all's said and done, it'll probably be between 95 and 97, I think.
Wow. Yeah. So that's almost, I mean, you know, from the very first draft, 35,000 words.
Yeah, it's it's amazing all the things you think you need until someone else points out.
Right, and you get a perspective and differing perspectives each time, right? Because the layers are sort of, initially, I think we go to writers, and then we go to the professionals we may go to a professional editor, but then we go to, you know, the agent who's going to be thinking a little bit differently, thinking also about the market and sellability of the book, and then the editor who is really just, yeah, like gonna dig in. It's such a cool, I love your story because and that's why I really wanted you to share it before we jump into the questions, because I think that you have such a unique perspective, and you have really spent you know, you said 20 years as a writer, and then almost that same amount of time editing other people's work, and then also just going through the experience you've gone through in the last couple of years of really putting, you know, all sort of ego and everything else aside and just letting people give you really, you know, smart and great notes that, even as experienced as you are as an editor, hadn't been your own revision, because it just took having someone else really look at it with that eye, right? What's the difference between editing and revising, Stacey?
So yeah, I know I had to think about this. So like my flippant first answer would be like, oh, they're different words for basically the same thing. But when you really dig in there and you look at both their literal definitions and kind of the connotations, so the definition of editing, or one of the first definitions, is to edit something for publication, to work on something, improve it for, I had the page and I've already forgotten it. I've forgotten the verb. But anyway, the idea that you're editing something is that you are changing it before it's being published. Revision is working on something to improve it, right? And so it removes this idea of publication. Like, you are revising something, whether it's a book or a project or whatever. It's something you have created that you are working on yourself to make better. Whereas editing has this connotation that it is someone else that's not you that is doing the editing, that you may incorporate those edits, but that editing is kind of like outside of you, and revision is what we do as writers. Mm-hmm. I think you can quibble with that, but I thought it was interesting that after looking at those definitions, so one of my craft books I use a lot with students for revision classes is called Self-Editing for Writers. Let's see if there may be a mirror view, so it may be flipped.
Self-editing for fiction writers, is that what it was called?
Yeah, Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, by Rennie Brown and Dave King is the name of it. And I think it's interesting that it's not called editing for fiction writers, right? It's called self-editing. And so the implication is that editing is not something you're doing to yourself in general, that it's something coming from outside.
Well, and I also like the way that you framed that, the idea that revision is about getting that idea, that project, to its fullest potential, right? Getting it to the place where it's really being realized, you know, as well and as artistically or what have you that it can be. And then editing is almost taking it a little bit further, but taking it with an eye to, like, a professional eye towards actually publishing it. And so as a writer, your goal is always going to be to get it get the revision to as far as you can get it. But then usually you're right, it's going to be out of your hands when it comes to the editing. What was the name of that book again? It was Self-Editing for Fiction Writers.
For fiction writers, yes.
By Brown and King, I believe. Okay. Well, so we have all sorts of questions from folks that came in, and we're hoping to get to as many of them as possible. So as you can probably tell, Stacey and I could probably talk to each other all night, but instead we're going to answer your questions. So the second topic, really, there were questions about editing your own work. A lot of you had specific questions, but I thought they were interesting and could be helpful to sort of hear what Stacey's take is on what she might advise you. So we're going to dive into this first, and then there were a lot of questions also about working with freelance editors and kind of understanding when you might look for someone who would edit your work outside of your writing circle or your friend circle. So we'll get to those next, but we're going to start with these, and I'm going to read the questions, Stacey, and then you get to kind of dive in. This is a long one. So this is so embarrassing, but I keep nodding off while revising or editing. It's not that my story is boring. I love my story, but even though I have a clear outline of the things I want to change and what I want them to be, I find the revision process to be dull. How can I help myself focus more and better motivate myself through this stage? I loved outlining, I loved drafting. I didn't mind the first revision or the second. I thought beta reading was incredibly helpful and was able to make a better outline with their feedback. I took an excellent class on revision with the WLT a few months ago and have been implementing the instructor's advice. But now that the task is in front of me, it's nap time. I don't even take naps. I desperately want to get through this draft because then I feel like it's just a polish away from querying and I don't know what's wrong with me. I should point out I've been struggling through this process since, does it say October there? I'm losing my screen. And it's not specific to the pandemic. So what do you say? What do you say to this lovely person who keeps falling asleep every time they try to? Do you find revision to be scintillating?
I feel like there are two types of writers, and there's the type of writer that loves drafting so much more than they love revision. And then there's the type of writer that loves revision more than they love drafting. Mm-hmm. Despite my early bumps, I've become a person that much prefers revision to drafting. Drafting for me is pretty painful. I can only do it for about 40, 45 minutes at a time before I have to take a break. It's kind of like pulling it out of me. It's exhausting feeling to me and hard. Revision, I lose track of time when I'm revising quite often. I can look up and it's been, time passes so much more quickly than it does when I'm drafting. But that said, I think more people like drafting than like revising. And there's a few reasons for this. So I thought this was such a great question. I had to jot down a couple different notes because there's so many angles to come at this question from. So one thing I might say that you could think about is this idea. I don't know if those of y'all listening in have read The Art of War. The War of Art.
The War of Art, the Stephen Pressman.
Yes, I'm about to tell you how to kill your enemies in battle.
You're about to take this in a totally different direction.
Yes, the War of Art, which is this lovely book. I use it when I teach classes on writing resistance and writer's block. And he has this great point that he says that resistance gets the most fierce the closer you get to the finish line. So there could just be this question that the writer who's asking this question, you are getting so close to the end that all those different things that make up resistance, they rear their head, right? Because when you're done, you want it to be of a certain quality, right? And that starts to feel kind of overwhelming. So one thing that could be going on is it could just be that kind of natural resistance that you just have to kind of navigate and deal with as a writer. But maybe that's not you. Maybe you have absolutely no trouble with writer's block ever and something else is going on here. And I think that for the people that don't like revising as much as drafting, it's because when you draft, even when you're outlining and more so in earlier revisions, you're getting to play right? You're letting your subconscious do a lot of the work, which is what is fun about writing, what feels kind of like magical creation, I believe, is what's coming out of your subconscious. And so that's a lot more fun. And when we revise, we're using our analytic critical brain. And so it's more like academic work in a way than it is that kind of like glorious rush of creation. So that also may be what is going on for you. So if that's the case, I think sometimes we want to look at revision as if it's like a checklist, and it makes it easier, right, to make these checklists. Like, I'm going to work on the dialogue, and then I'm going to work on the characterization, and then I'm going to work on the language last. And we do this checklist that we work through. But again, it robs you of that sense of play. And so kind of letting your approach to revision be a little messier, of like, it's not just that you're checking off the notes you have to fix, but you're coming to that work, you're sinking back into the scene, you're letting yourself play around with it. That can lead to it feeling a little more fun in some ways. Another thing to remember is there's natural ebbs and flows in our emotional attachment to our work, especially novels that you're working on a really long time. It's just natural to sometimes hate your book and sometimes love your book. And so sometimes you just have to work through those periods where it's feeling more boring. And then finally, you're getting close and you want to finish. So here's some practical advice for like how you can keep working even though it wants to make you go to sleep. And that's making it fun in kind of external ways. So can you change up your location where you're working? Can you do it somewhere that feels fun, like a coffee shop, so you look forward to the work because of where you're at, as opposed to the work itself? I've lately, before the city got shut down, really liked working at the public library downtown because it's a beautiful building and you can book these private rooms. You can bribe yourself in other ways. Like if you do X amount of writing in a day, you get something you want to buy, or you can do a nice thing for yourself. So bribery works well when it's that kind of work. And then working in shorter stretches of time. So like you don't have to sit down and write 3 hours. You just have to work on your revision 20 minutes, and that's easier to get your butt in the chair and start. And then finally, if you're doing like a full writing session, you can mix it up with writing that is more fun. So maybe you've started a new project. So you're like, I'm going to work on the new project for 30 minutes and then I'm going to move for revision. Or if you don't want to clutter up your head with a whole new project, you're like, I'm just going to do some writing prompts that are fun when I first sit down, and then I'll move to revision. And so you're just kind of tricking your brain into having it feel more creative, even though some of that ending revision stuff is much more by the numbers.
This is why I call you Dr. Swann, because you give so much good and practical advice. That was a great, really thoughtful answer to that question. All right, we're going to go to the next question. I've written a short story I really like. However, friends who have read it don't seem to get it. When I have tried to find out what is missing or unclear, they haven't been able to tell me. As we have discussed the piece, I've told them what I meant and shown them the text that I thought supported the meaning. They usually get it at that point. I can't figure out how to change the story so it unfolds without losing the subtlety that foreshadows the outcome. I think this is an impossible question to answer without reading the story, but perhaps you have some general guidelines to help me. And I thought that, yeah, I mean, it's tough to speak to the specific story, but I also think this experience of kind of giving material to people and finding that they don't get it and wondering what you can do to change it, and then sort of, I wonder as a writer how you deal with that situation, or how you advise folks to deal with that situation.
Yeah, it's a really tough one, right? Because there is such a fine line between under-explaining and over-explaining. And not only is there a fine line, it's a different line for every reader. And so I definitely think, and I feel like this is maybe what the writer of this question is afraid of, you don't want to go so far that you write something that is 100% crystal clear without any ambiguity for 100% of your readers, right? Like most good fiction has some kind of ambiguity. I would say part of it depends on the type of story that you're writing. Experimental literature, stuff that's more literary, often gets to be a little more imprecise in its meaning. Like you have to do a lot of work to come to the meaning yourself. And that's fine. That's what the reader expects. But if you're writing like a mystery novel and your reader doesn't understand what has happened, then you're not fulfilling the promise of a mystery novel, right? Which is that you get clarity on this crime. So all of these are kind of dancing around without giving an exact answer. I would say that if it's hard to know how many people have read this story, but if no one is getting what you're meaning, then you're not conveying what you want to convey, right? And that's a failing, in the work itself that needs to be revised. So showing it to more people, to get a sense of that, if you've only shown it to a handful. And then sometimes in these special cases, hiring an outside editor is good, because it's like, just your friends and readers, that's not their job to be able to parse what a story means. An editor is a professional at it. And if the editor can't figure out what you're trying to say, then you know that you need to be more explicit, and then the editor can help you find that line between what is too much and not enough. I don't say that thinking that everyone always needs to hire an editor, but this is a special case where it may be necessary. And Becca, I would be interested in you as a former agent, like your feeling on, how important is clarity or even overstatement when you were reading submissions from authors?
I think that overstatement is more annoying than me having to dig a little bit more to get the clarity, and I think you're totally right that it depends on what you're writing and sort of what the assumptions are or what the expectations are for that genre or that category. I do think, though, sometimes it could be that the story just isn't working as it is. And maybe you can approach writing that story or taking that topic and approach it in a different way and see if it somehow becomes a little bit more organically what you want it to be, if that makes sense. I mean, but it's hard if you've written something that you really love and that you feel like you've done what you meant to do with it, and then the feedback you're getting is not giving you that same assurance, right? But I think those are good. I love what you had to say there, Stacey. And we're going to go to the next question.
I'll say just one last thing on that is, because it is a short story, what the person who wrote it could do is try sending it out some places and seeing if any of the editor, sometimes you will get straight rejections. Sometimes you'll get rejections with some explanation. And so maybe it's ready to go and it just hasn't found its right reader yet. And you'll discover that if you send it out.
That's a great idea. Yeah. So I've written one truly terrible draft of a book. I've let it sit. I've figured out what it's actually about. I can't believe I was shocked to realize it's about me. And I feel like I know my protagonist's emotional beginning and end points now. I know the central conflict and whether or not she's going to make it to the other side of her opportunity for change. But I still don't know the details of the actual plot. That goes atop all of those things. I have a vague sense of what could happen, but now that I truly know my characters, can I trust them to get me there without plotting the whole thing out? Or must I try to solve the plot before attempting draft number 2?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it depends on again, like so many things, the type of writer you are. So I talk in my novel hatchery class a lot about, you have to figure out if you're a plotter or a pantster, right? Like some people only like to write if they're figuring out the plot as they go. Some people need the outline as to get them to the end. I would say it sounds like this person would rather not outline first. It's kind of the gist that I'm getting from the question. And so I would say, now you know your characters. Maybe the reason why you weren't having a clear plot in the original draft was because you didn't know the characters well. So now you can go in and kind of plot it out as you write. And then if that's not working, if you're finding that the plot still isn't coming, that probably is a point you're going to have to stop and kind of think in an outline. But what I always encourage my students is that an outline can be revised. It can be sketchy. It can be a work in progress. Like, don't think of it as you have to map out the entire plot for the whole book, but you could just map out like 4 key points that you're aiming towards along the way. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is regarding editing dialogue. If or when the conversation really is a local type, say Southern, I noticed some editors may tend to edit it out. John Gardner references doing that also in his Common Errors chapter in his The Art of Fiction for Young Writers. So I'm a little confused about when to use and or keep vernacular, specifically in a Southern setting.
I have, you'll find editors have very strong feelings about all sorts of weird, minute things. I have very strong feelings about what they call I dialect, which is EYE dialect. That is the stuff that you see in a lot of older, like when people are from the South, sometimes minority characters, especially minority characters from the South. The words are not written as they're really spelled, right? They're almost written out phonetically. And so if you were to read it aloud, it might be a close approximation of what someone from deep East Texas sounded like. But when you're looking at it on the page, all it looks like is misspellings. And so it automatically conveys this connotation of almost looking down on your characters or judging them for not being educated, even if they're educated characters that just happen to speak that way. It's something that modern literature has moved away from. And so what you can do to still convey that is basically you take what your instinct is to try and write it so that you hear it when you read those kind of misspellings out loud, tone that down by 95% so that you have like, you know, maybe you're dropping the G's off of the words or it's very small, subtle things. And what you want to focus on is like the phrases that somebody from that region would use, the kind of sentence construction. Maybe they speak in more sentence fragments or they have a lot of clauses, right? You have to work harder to get that feeling of authenticity. But I really caution against using that kind of really strong dialect because it often comes across as just slightly condescending to your characters. Not everyone agrees with me. You'll run into modern novels that do it, but I think it's a detriment when you're trying to find an agent too.
Are there any authors that you've read recently that you think have done this well, what you're describing, or is there anyone you can point us to? I'm putting you on the spot, so maybe you can think about it, and if anyone comes up.
I will stare at my shelf quietly. While you read the next question.
Don't do that. Okay, great question and great answer. I think that was a great answer. I'm participating in Camp NaNoWriMo this month, trying to make sense of the 50,000 word dung heap that was my previous NaNoWriMo project. For revision of a very rough draft, what do you suggest? I'm assuming sort of how you would approach a very rough draft.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, it's like all first drafts have the potential to be this kind of big mess. But NaNoWriMo novels even more so because you've got a word count every day, right? So you're just aiming for that word count no matter where it takes you. My recommendation for the first thing to do is really try and get a sense of what you've got by making what I call a reverse outline, which is when you outline something that already exists, right? And maybe you already have an outline for this, but put that away. Basically, I want you to go in, look at every scene or chapter, and write a little summary of what you have. And then once you have that down in like a 3-page document or however long it is, you can start to see like how much of this was stuff I just wrote to understand the characters and the plot that I don't need at all. How much of this is stuff that really needs to be combined with some action for it to work as a scene. It lets you know what you have, because I feel like it's such a big pile of scenes that you can never keep it all in your head without having a kind of document to track it.
I love that idea. Thank you. I'm taking a lot of notes. What is the best way to tackle timeline issues in your manuscript?
Yes, this is a bane of revision too, right? Because you change one thing and then suddenly there's 8 problems in your manuscript because you're like, So I think, again, like much like that document I was just talking about outlining, you need like a timeline for your book. You need to know exactly, you know, maybe your book covers a long period, so it's that you have to know what year the scene is taking place. Maybe it's more like granular and you even need to know the time of day. on all the different days. So you need to label. And again, you've got to figure out, like, do you want your novel to be linear, like chronologically, or do you have a lot of flashbacks? But you just have to tag everything so that you know, you've got to pin it down in your head so you know when it's happening, and then it becomes so much more easy to revise. So when I was writing my novel in the first draft, I wasn't really thinking what day things were happening on. I just knew I was moving into the future, but like 3 days could have passed from the last scene, or a month could have passed. Like, I didn't really know. I was just moving the book forward. And it was only when I was very close, maybe 60 of the way percent through that first draft, I realized that I could make my novel take place in the course of 1 week. And then I started assigning scenes with that framework in mind, and it made it so much easier to finish the draft at that point.
I love it. Yeah. What do you think of flashbacks when you're revising, when you're working on someone else's work, when you're editing? How do you approach flashbacks in the work?
You know, I like them, and I think one of the fun things about being an editor when you're working on a novel that isn't chronological is you're getting to like step back and look at the big picture and see if, is there a different way we could order these scenes so they have more impact, because flashbacks, the thing is, you can move them around, right, without impacting that present day storyline. So I personally, I like flashbacks. I think you do have a problem with putting in flashbacks you don't really need because they're illustrating your character, but you don't need that because we already know your character because, we've been hanging out with them for 50 pages already. There was something else I was going to say about so my rule of thumb on whether a flashback needs to stay is that so you're reading along a book, it's in the present day, you read a flashback, that flashback needs to change the way that you were looking at something in the novel or answer a question that you had about a character. It needs to move the plot forward in a different way, often by either enlarging the characterization in a direction that you weren't aware of, or making you realize as a reader that you were wrong about something, like you thought this character was a real jerk. And then you get a flashback and you're like, oh, no, they're not a jerk. They're just a product of their environment. And that was something that triggered them in this very specific way. So your flashbacks need to do a lot of work to justify them, but they can be really fun when they do.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Here we go. I've heard Lauren Groff say she writes things out by hand, then throws them away, trusting the good stuff will stay with her. I think Jennifer Egan does the same thing. Insanity or brilliant approach?
Whatever works for you as a writer works for you. For me, that would be insanity. I mean, I'm the kind of writer that, like, sometimes, I've read my novel so many times now, and maybe it wouldn't happen at this point, but up until like 2 years ago, I could read a scene and not remember writing it, like the whole scene. It was like someone else had written it. I'm like, oh, this is not bad. I kind of like that. And I figure if I can forget a whole scene that I wrote, like asking my brain to remember the good stuff, I can't even remember important things in my day-to-day life. Like, maybe it's because Lauren Groff is still young. I don't know.
Still got her mind, her memory. All right.
So I think my call is insanity, but do what you want.
I think they are both brilliant, Lauren Groff and Jennifer Egan, but I do think that sounds insane to me. Okay, so now we're going to get on to the next big topic, which was sort of looking at the idea of hiring a professional editor. There were a lot of questions, some of them similar, some different. So just starting with the basic, is it a good idea to hire someone for editing? What does editing even consist of when you're hiring someone to do it?
So the first part's trickier, right? And I think why it's tricky is the financial realities of being a writer, specifically a writer in America at this particular point in time. It's very hard to make money off of writing. There's very few writers that are just writers and don't do other things to supplement their income, like teach or give lectures or things like that. And so asking someone to spend a lot of money on this thing that may not bring a lot of money back in is impractical for a lot of people, or simply not possible. And so I don't think it's essential to hire someone for editing. I do think it's essential to get good feedback from other people. So maybe you can find like-minded writers, like through the Writers League and other great organizations, to have beta readers that you trust that can help bring you that. If the financial part of it is not an issue for you, if you've got that amount of income you can devote to that, and you're really, what is important to you is making your book the best that you can, then hiring an editor can be great. I think we've all probably experienced giving your novel to a friend, and then 8 months later you haven't heard anything back yet because people are busy. And so with an editor, it's a service you're purchasing, and so you'll get it back in a certain amount of time, and it'll be of a certain quality. What does editing consist of? There are different types of editing depending on what you need. So some people you can hire someone for a developmental edit, which is where you give someone kind of a rough draft, a second draft, and they're helping you shape it, in the essential sense, doing that kind of like broad building of stuff. You can wait and do all of the drafts yourself and get it to a point where you've taken it as far as you possibly can, and then you can hire someone for a full edit. You can hire edits that just give you like a 10-page letter describing ways that you might want to think about revising your novel. There are also forms of editing that include, like in-margin notes about kind of more smaller things. And then at the very end, there's also, which sometimes people wrap up in a larger edit that covers a lot of things, there's line editing, right? Which is going line by line. So editing can consist basically of whatever you need at any particular moment in your writing draft.
Okay, so we're going to keep going because we have more questions that are going to elaborate on all of that. So at what stage in the novel writing process do you consider a professional editor?
For me personally, I'd like to take things as far as I can get them on my own. And so like, if you can look at your book and see the issues that you want to improve on, I think you should keep improving until you hire. Take it as far as you can before you get an editor. That said, like sometimes people do get stuck early on and they really love the idea. They know it's important. They know it's a book that they need to write, but they're stuck in those early stages, and doing a developmental draft can be really helpful then, again, if you have the money for it. And then the perk of that is that it's sometimes those developmental edits are a little less expensive than a full edit that includes line edits and everything, because it takes a lot less time.
Okay. How and where is the best way to find a good developmental editor?
So there's a lot of great, so the Writers League, right? Y'all have a page of—
We do. On our resources page, we list editors that we are aware of, a lot of them are in Texas, but some of them are in other places for sure.
So that's a good place to start. And then, and Google can help you, just Googling editing and the type, whatever you're working on, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, novel, short story. And then something to always ask, not everyone does it, depends on how busy they are, but you can always ask, do you do like a 10-page kind of sample edit so I can see if it meshes. So some people might do that for free. Some people might say, look, I'll do the first 20 pages for a smaller dollar amount just so you can see. That's what I used to do. When I got busy enough that I didn't really have time to do any for free, I'd say, like, if you want to just give me the first 20 pages of your novel, for just $50, which was a, lower rate than my normal hourly rate, I'll do an edit for you and you can see if we're a good fit to work together. Because again, it's important that someone is reading your book and getting what you're trying to do with it. So not every editor will be a perfect fit.
Well, and that was a question that I had, and that is, what advice can you give as someone who's on the other side of that conversation as an editor? What advice can you give to writers in terms of the things that they should ask and the things that they should understand up front before they start working with someone? So assuming they're going to talk to, I always tell the writers who ask me about this, do a little bit of comparison shopping and, have a few different people that you at least have an understanding of what they would charge and what they would do. And then if you're going to have conversations and narrow it down, what does that conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is just, it's great to talk to people on the phone to just get a sense of their personality, right? Because this is someone, that you'll be working with a bit and having a couple conversations with, and um, so talking to them just to get a sense of their personality is always a nice thing as well. I would say ask for specifics on exactly, not just the prices, but what you get for that price. How long is the feedback letter going to be that they give you? How, get estimates on how long it may take them. Sometimes editors get backed up, right? And you think you really need something back in 2 months, and then 4 months have passed, and you haven't got it. So asking them their timeline, if they, if anything might happen that might change that timeline. Those are all important things. And then asking them the kind of books they tend to work on, because some stuff there's some types of books that have specific things you have to understand. So in general, as an editor, like I am hesitant to take on middle grade fiction because I don't read middle grade fiction. And like I'll still read YA stuff. I feel like I have a grasp on YA. So like if you're writing a specific type of book, you want to find an editor that's done some of that writing. You don't want to send your literary novel to an editor who tends to work only on like romance genre fiction, right? Because they're going to have different expectations for the notes that your book needs to hit. So.
Mm-hmm. And then what about you as an editor? What are the things that you look for in a client?
So I like, it's always helpful when you're a fan of the work, right? And so when you read the first 20 pages and you're like, this is a book that if I picked it up at the library or at the bookstore that I would want to keep reading, is really fun. And then you want a sense, I think it's important to, as a writer, to be honest with yourself about what you're looking for when you hire an editor. Like it feels bad for everyone if you, as an editor, spend a ton of time and give a writer feedback and then it becomes clear that they're not going to take any of it because really what they wanted was for someone to tell them that it was all working really well. And so like, if you're going to spend the time and effort to hire an editor, go in thinking like this person's going to give me a lot of things that are going to take a lot of work, and that's great because they're going to make the book better. Because you're not, editors to do their job are going to give you a lot of feedback. You're never going to get someone saying this was amazing, send it off right now, because everything can always be improved.
And then and we'll keep going with the questions, but I have one more. So, and you've experienced this, I imagine, with your process right now with Doubleday, with your editor. How do you, as a writer, the assumption is that editorial notes are suggestions, but not necessarily, directives or demands. But how do you, as a writer, kind of figure out what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it's really, I think one of the wonderful things about like how ideally it works in publishing, right, is like you get to talk to the editors before you decide who you want to work with. And the bulk of that conversation is them talking about both what they loved about the book and what they think needs work. And so like my agent wonderfully said to me, like, it's not, what's more important than the amount of money they're offering or, the status of the house is that the editor gets your book and you like what they're telling you about the revisions. Because I can't imagine how painful this process would be if my editor was telling me things that I didn't want to do. And so she's been, and she has been great, always saying like, just take what feels right to you and don't take the rest. Although I do notice though, right, that when I get, so there's some stuff I didn't want to change. And then I get another round of notes on the next version and she's still asking me to change it. But, you got to keep trying, right? She's sure she's right.
Well, so, and what is your sense? So we had a question in the chat box that says, if you don't like a note from your editor, the publisher, can you not apply it?
Yeah,
and I guess, yeah, right?
And there was a great example of, you've got to trust your gut at a certain point. It's your novel, right? So there's a chapter in my book that I loved that felt really important to me. And she kept telling me that I didn't need it, that day was dragging on too long, too many things were happening in the evening of that day in the chronology of the novel, and that I should just cut it so that we could get to the next day. And it felt wrong to me. I knew I needed that scene. And so what I did is I wound up just moving it to a day later. I changed a few things about it. And so it happens a day later, has a little more space to happen. And the last time I talked to my editor about it, she suddenly was saying that was one of her favorite scenes in the entire novel. It was just in the wrong place before. So,
Right.
so listen to yourself. And there's some, there was another scene that she wanted me to cut that I just couldn't do because I knew I would regret it. So I just tried to make it cut as much of the kind of flab from it, as I could. I don't know if it's always practical, but I love the advice. I was in like a informal workshop with George Saunders during my MFA. And he said the best kind of feedback, whether you're getting it from a student or an editor, is when they tell you the thing that they think you should change, it feels like it was already your idea. You just couldn't articulate it. You're like, yes, exactly. That like a bell is going off in your head. Like that's the stuff that you really should listen to. It gets tricky, right? There's stuff, I remember even with our writing group, Becca, there was things that one person told me that I was just like, no, just automatically. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then 3 months later, I'm looking at that scene going, damn it, they were right. I really have to do that thing.
Well, what I used to say what I would say to my clients as an agent was, because I would edit their manuscripts before sending them to editors. And if there was something that they didn't agree with me on, I just asked that they really understand why it was important to them that it stay. Like, not that they just have an argument in mind that they're ready to make, because if they're just keeping it because they don't want to make a change, then that's not a reason to keep it. But if you can articulate what it is about it that is so important, I think that takes you a long way, whether it's with an agent or an editor ultimately, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to remember too that like translating feedback is its own skill. It's great for us as writers to have, because sometimes you get a note about something, and it's not right. That they're like, you should, here's a really common when you get in workshop with short stories, like, I need to know more about the mother. Tell me more about the mother. And so you're like, oh, I guess I should put in a whole like flashback where we get stuff about the mother. And that wasn't what they wanted. What they really wanted was they didn't understand the mother's motivation in that particular scene. They could not understand why the mother was doing what she was doing. So their response was to say, I need to know more about her, when really it was just her motivation in that moment was muddy. So part of learning to interpret, whether it's a professional editor or an editor at a house, or just members of your writing group, it's like, don't just dismiss it. Try and figure out, why did they say that? And maybe the way to fix it is not what they suggest, but something else entirely.
I love that you're saying that too, because one of the classes that we do periodically, which is actually now available on our YouTube channel, totally free, is the 3-hour class that John Pipkin teaches, which is how to critique others' writing. So basically, it's, if you want to be in a writing group, if you are in a writing group, guys, and you feel like you guys some of the people in that group or yourself even would benefit from figuring out how to really offer criticism in a way that is as helpful as it can possibly be to the writer, I would encourage you to take a look at that class, because it's, I never did an MFA program. Most of us, I believe, haven't. And so if we're going to be out in the world reading people's work and sharing feedback, it's good to be educated on what that looks like, right?
Yeah, it's that. Yeah, I mean, I've heard tons of great things about John's class on that too, because how you phrase stuff is so important.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about this a little bit. I think, what's the best way to find an editor to match my genre and style? It sounds like you want to find someone who's doing, and that's a question that you guys expect to get, right? As editors, what books are you working on? What books are you excited about? One person in the chat box mentioned Yellowbird. We have a lot of great local editors here in Austin. Look on our website, because a ton of them are listed, but I know that many of them do have people who work in different genres and different specialties for that reason. So, okay. Do you have any tips for finding a regular editor when your work may not be traditional?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are writing more experimental fiction, you want to find an editor who likes to read experimental fiction. And that's a good question to ask when you're, when you're talking to different editors to try and pick one. What are the books that you as you love to read as a reader? I think experimental is its own set of issues, and you want someone who likes to read that kind of fiction. So maybe you as the writer can think about other writers that are kind of not traditional in that same way that you think your work is, and then you can ask the editors what they think about, that particular, what do you think of Bolano or whatever experimental author.
Thank you. So, Stacey, not to be gauche, but what is the typical cost of working with a freelance editor? I actually don't even know these days what this is, but I know it's different for everybody. And also what you mentioned earlier is really true. That is that the scale of the work can be very different as well. So depending on the person, depending on the scale of the work, it's all, but would it be correct to say that it's typically going to cost in the four figures to get something done?
Yeah, like if you're looking for a full novel and it's not just there's like a final stage copy edit, where someone's doing just like making sure that your novel's grammatically accurate and all that. And I think people sometimes still just charge, if you have people that are kind of newer to it, maybe like $40 an hour or something, although that figure might be 10 years out of date by now.
Yeah, I think that's pretty low.
But if you're talking about a full manuscript, pretty intensive feedback, even just a developmental edit of a full manuscript, I would bet like $1,000 is probably kind of a typical thing, even for a developmental edit. Going up more than that, I mean, yeah, it's kind of all over the place. You'll see, everything from $1,000 to $3,000 which is a crazy amount of money, I know. But it's a lot of time too. When I do a full novel edit, it takes me a lot of hours. I used to charge by the hour, but then it would get weird because you never know exactly how many hours it's going to take, especially if there's line editing. So then I moved to charging by the word. So if you're fractions and decimal points, always my math brain is so poor, but basically if you multiply, a lot of people's rates are like you multiply the word count of your novel by like anywhere from like 0.02 to 0.05 is a typical range I see for a full edit.
Yeah. All right. And I think it is true that you get what you pay for. I mean, ideally you seek out someone who's got a good reputation, whose time is valuable and worth paying for if you're able to.
Yeah.
What should I do while I wait for my editor to begin working with me? My manuscript is done. And I sort of took this question to that it could apply to someone who is waiting for a freelance editor to have the time to work with them, or waiting for an actual editor at a publishing house. So do you have suggestions for either of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think a great thing to do is to start working on the next project, like maybe the next novel or like whatever, start working on something new. I will say though that for me, like it's so hard to keep a novel.
Sorry guys, my screen just flipped. I don't know what happened there, but you can see all my emails. Okay, go ahead.
For me, I haven't started on my new novel yet because I kept worrying, like having to go back and do more and more revision, that if I started working on something new, I would like not be as easily able to access the old novel and get in there and do some real work. But like working on things in other genres, like, I've been trying to work on nonfiction essays while I've been waiting for my editor some of those months, going back and working on short stories again. So yeah, I would say if the manuscript's done, you're waiting for the editor, don't need to do anything to that manuscript. So work on something else.
Definitely don't do anything to that manuscript, because that will be really frustrating if someone is working on your manuscript and you reach out to them and say, oh, actually read these pages now because I've done some more work on a manuscript. That's actually a great point. That happens to
people nuts.
too, I will say. Like that would happen to me as an agent. Someone would submit something to me and I'd be reading it and then I would get another draft from them. And that's a little frustrating. Should editors read the whole manuscript before suggesting edits or commenting on something that is answered later in the manuscript? So what is your approach? I thought this would be a good jumping off point to just understand very, not dwell too long on it, but what do you do? You read through once and then you go back and read more closely. How do you approach a manuscript?
So for full novels, what I do, and I do a lot of in margin comments, as well as, and then at the end of every chapter, I'll make a little list of like things that I think, are working well and maybe need more work within the chapter. And then when I'm done, there's also a big letter that covers the entire manuscript. So like I'm commenting on my first read as I go through, but once I'm done, before I give it back to the writer, I go back to the beginning and reread all of my notes, because invariably there will be things that my advice was wrong given what happened later in the novel, right? I thought something was like a mistake that they left it out, but really they left it out as like a part of like plotting and withholding for suspense, and it was right for them to do that. So I'll go back and reread everything and clean it up and add new things as I read through my comments a second time. It's tricky though, right? Because sometimes you're just sending an editor, you just want them to look at your opening because you're about to query agents and you just want to make sure that opening is top notch, and you maybe don't have the money for a full edit or for some other reason. And so then you just have to take whatever comments speculate about something answered later in the manuscript with a grain of salt,
Yeah. That's tough too, to just have a couple of chapters really edited, but then if an agent requests a full manuscript, you've got a manuscript that maybe feels a little imbalanced. I mean, I don't know. It's a tough one. That's why if you're able to find, again, people that you trust that are other writers that you can also share material with, so if you're not able to spend for an editor, that can be really helpful if they're going to give you a full read.
And I would definitely say that it is, like, I witnessed this in my MFA workshops, that reading only parts of a novel, it's very hard to give feedback on a novel when you haven't read the whole thing, even if you're just reading your friend's novel or you're in a writing group. So I would always suggest waiting until the full book is done before you let someone read it for feedback. I didn't 100% take my own advice. Like, I wanted people to read the opening because I just wasn't sure if it was working. But once I got past the first 100 pages, no one saw the other 300 pages until I was completely done. I just don't think you should start revising until you get to the end, because you don't even know what your beginning should be until you write your ending. So it's just kind of a waste of it's a waste of your money and your time, and counterproductive to get in comments on just part of the novel.
You don't know what your beginning should be until you've written your ending. Stacey Swann, you little gems. You're just dropping.
I'm sure that's stolen from someone else.
Who stole it from someone else? Okay, yes. The final topic, not the final topic, but there was just some questions regarding specific tools. I wrote this one for you because I thought it would be interesting for anyone who's not familiar with Scrivener, for you to talk a little bit about just, in broad strokes what it is, but then also how Scrivener factored into your revision process.
So Scrivener is a writing program specifically for book length works. I think you can also do screenplays on it maybe with the templates, but it's a way to write your novel. And there's a lot of things I love about it. I love that it's relatively cheap. I think it's like $40. I love that they give you 30 days free, and they're not consecutive days. They're actually days that you open the program, so you can get a sense of whether you like it or not. It has a lot of bells and whistles, that like things with metadata and this and that I don't even know how to use. But for me, what is helpful is that I could put things in separate scenes and then it's easy to drag around the order of those scenes. You also can have files with notes and files with photographs, and it's just all in this easily contained space. I always like to quiz people when I find out whether they're using Scrivener or trying Scrivener. In my informal polling, I have found about 60 to 70% of writers like Scrivener, 35 to 30% hate it, and you won't know until you mess around with that free trial. The people that hate it usually wind up going back to just using some version of like Google Docs or Word documents, basically organizing everything in nested folders, folders within folders. And if that works for you, it's fine. Some people hate it, and I don't know why. I like Scrivener. I used it for my rough draft. I thought it was invaluable. I could not do my revision in it because as an editor, I work in track changes and comment boxes for, 15 years now. That's how my brain wants to do revision. And I just couldn't do that in Scrivener in a way that felt intuitive to me. I think maybe the Mac version of Scrivener has kind of something more similar to track changes than the PC version does. I could be outdated in that information though. So I'm all for Scrivener for first drafts. I have moved back to Word for my second, third, fourth, fifth. Actually, I think I did a second draft. I did do a second draft because the first draft was such a mess that the second draft was just cleaning up that mess. So it was a separate Scrivener file, and then I moved back to Word.
All right. Well, thank you very much. What are your favorite guides and manuals for the revision process? Do you have any books or things to suggest?
Yes. So besides the self-editing for fiction writers that I mentioned at the beginning, what I love about it is it's super practical. It's written by editors. It works really well for kind of like genre fiction, popular fiction, but also has the practical things that literary fiction would be helped by. Great stuff on how to improve your dialogue, and exercises and stuff like that. So I think that's a great book. I also, when I teach my revision class, the other course book I reference a lot is called The Artful Edit by Susan Bell. It's maybe not quite so like nuts and bolts practical, but like I think it's really useful just in thinking about revision in a larger sense and how you kind of navigate revision. I'll paraphrase a favorite quote she has. She's like, the idea that you can break apart a novel into like a list of items to revise is an illusion, but it's a necessary illusion to getting the revision done. So I love that one. There is a journal called, let's see, I don't know if you can read that. It's mirror reversed, but Draft, the journal. It's a literary journal. They don't put out a ton of issues. You can get back issues on their website though, that have early drafts and later drafts, and then interviews with the authors where they talk about the revision process. And that stuff is hard to find. It's really hard to find early drafts of anything out there in the world so that you can start to understand like what revision can do. Like, I think when we first start revising, we're mostly just moving words around and fixing sentences, right? And understanding like how radical the radical acts of revision. So I recommend that one. And then there's one more book, which right there. And again, that's mirror reversed. It's called Story Logic and the Craft of Fiction by Katherine Brady. The problem with this book is that it is written in like academic jargon. So it's like that kind of book where you have to read it and then translate it to yourself to even understand what she's saying. But I still have often used it in classes because it's the only book that I have found that tries to talk about the difference between a good book and a great book. Like what elevates a book from just being a good, solid book to being like a brilliant book. And like the short answer to a lot of it is ambiguity, like not nailing things down too hard. And so anyway, if you have some patience for some really academic language, I recommend that one.
Thank you, Stacey. Are there any helpful websites that could help first-time writers in regards to formatting, revising, and editing for novels?
just in terms of like the formatting stuff, there's a lot of, I think you just Google novel formatting and there's like tons of like agents and other people that have put up helpful sites on that. I do not know offhand. What I will say is that for grammar and usage stuff, university writing center websites, there's one out of Purdue called OWLS. It's OWLS. Great stuff on grammar and usage. But for the more complicated aspects of revision and editing, I don't know any websites, sadly. Maybe some of you do, and you can put them in the comments.
Yes. All right. So then we had some questions that didn't really fit into those specific categories, and we'll go through them. And I know we're starting to run a little long, but we want to get to everyone if we can. I love this question because I think it's a really, I love any chicken or the egg question, but which comes first in today's market, a good editor or a good agent?
I think, yes, you will be a good person to answer this question too. My gut is that it is a really competitive market, like a really competitive art market. And sometimes it takes a good paid editor to get the good agent, but not always. And then a lot of agents are good editors themselves, right? And so they will help you edit your book too. So again, with the financial things in mind, I like to say maybe not a good editor, but definitely some good readers before you send it to the good agent.
Yeah, good readers. And I would go back to something you said earlier. Are you getting your work out there, especially if you write short fiction or if you're comfortable writing short fiction or personal essays? Are you submitting to journals and other places so that you can, you know, for agents, sometimes that can be the thing that sort of puts you over the top, is having those credentials, having been validated by somebody else. And also you might find yourself, I've talked to plenty of writers who have gotten a lot of really great advice and have strengthened their writing from working with journal editors who have helped them, you know, really understand their own voice and the way that they tell stories and how to do it effectively. So I'd encourage you to do that. I think that, you know, as an agent, a lot of agents edit and edit, I think, really well because they expect that they need to, because they're part of the piece of this is very competitive as well. And it's really hard to sell books to editors that aren't fully formed. And I honestly, I didn't have a lot of clients who used editors before they got to me. But I can certainly respect if you're feeling really stuck and you're not ready to kind of take it to an agent yet, and you know there's probably something more that can be done, that, yeah, if that's something that you can do, then for sure it's probably gonna serve you well. If your gut's telling you that it's not ready and that the querying process is going to be difficult unless somebody does dig in it with you and help you take it the rest of the way, then I think you should listen to your gut probably. That's my answer. Okay. So when writing a synopsis, what is a must before sending it out to an agent or publisher? Did you edit synopses when you were an editor, or as an editor, have you?
You know, I would, but always with the caveat to my clients that I didn't feel like I was particularly adept at it, you know. So it's like, if you insist, I'll help, but honestly, maybe you should buy, it's kind of like query letters. It's a very specialized skill. So like, yeah, when I had to write mine, I had a lot of other people looking at it. But yeah, I feel like, Becca, this is a question much better for you.
Yeah, I would say my best advice for a synopsis is that, well, first of all, see what the submission guidelines are for whoever you're sending it to. So you're probably sending it to an agent, unless you're sending directly to publishers. And if they're asking for a synopsis, they may be telling you some things that they expect to have in it in terms of how long the page, you know, how many pages it's going to be, which is always a big question. But it really is, in my mind, it's a roadmap to your book. And so it's kind of telling me where the book begins, where it goes, who the main characters are, and what that, you know, climax and then ending is. So it's not meant to have a cliffhanger in it. It's not meant to end with a question. It's really there for whoever's reading it to understand where that manuscript is going to end up, and it kind of helps them decide if they're going to read the entire manuscript. That was the only time I would read synopses, would be if I was enjoying a manuscript and I thought, okay, if it could go in this direction, and if it goes in this direction, I'm going to be with it, but it could also go in this direction, and if it goes there, I'm probably not going to be with it. And so I'll pull out the synopses and see the synopsis, I don't know why I keep saying synopses, and see whether or not it's doing what I would want it to do. So, but I always look at the submission guidelines for sure.
And that's also the weird difference between like when you're submitting novels, like I only have one agent out of like 40 that asked me for a synopsis. But if you're selling, like nonfiction is different, right? Like not really memoir, but other nonfiction books where you have to have you get your contract based off a synopsis, basically.
Well, a proposal. Yeah. A proposal.
Okay. So that's a proposal and not a synopsis.
Yeah. So a proposal is different. A synopsis, I think in fiction, a synopsis is more likely to be asked for when you're writing literary fiction, but when you're writing genre fiction, because there are certain expectations for mysteries, for cozy mysteries, for thrillers, for romance. I said this, I think, on my query letter. Ask Us Anything, that if you're writing a romance and the two people don't end up together at the end, you may not be writing romance. I mean, you're writing a love story, but there's expectation that those two characters have to be together, right? So the synopsis helps in genre, is really helpful because it tells an agent whether or not you're hitting the beats that you need to hit in order for it to really be in that category, if that makes sense. No pressure, but how do you best find an agent and publishing company? You know, this is something that we are going to do a class on probably pretty soon. I'm going to do my the agent search class, but you know, Stacey, what would be your advice, your nuggets of wisdom for any of the writers who are listening?
You know, with agents, it's like, it's good to do the research, see who their other clients are. You know, if you know people with agents, talk to them about their experience with their agent. But, you know, I mean, I don't know, because I guess it seemed to me fairly easy to figure out via the internet just what were reputable established agencies and what wasn't. And I would say stick with the reputable and established agencies. Never, like, agents that ask for money in any way are not real agents.
Yeah, like any sort of payment up front. Yeah, for sure. I think that that is true. Like these days, you can really learn a lot about agencies by just doing simple searches. And I'll also say that for, you know, our members out there, that I'm always happy to talk to anyone about anything regarding potential agents or publishing companies that they've been approached by. So you can always also reach out to me. All right. I think this might be our last one. My question is admittedly off topic. Should I include my nascent Instagram page address in my contact info for submissions on submittable or query letters? I've never had much interest in social media. I don't have a Facebook account. I have a Twitter account that I rarely log into. I own domain for my name, but need to develop a website. I joined Instagram only because during this quarantine, my church is providing programming on there. I know there's a lot of great programming on Instagram right now, guys. All the institutions and organizations I care about have pages, and I'm learning new things daily. But do agents and literary journals care about Instagram? I can answer from the agent point of view. They really don't care unless you're going to tell them that you have 1 million followers. I mean, you could have fewer than 1 million, but it's what your social media translates into in terms of outreach and who you're connecting with that means something to agents. But that doesn't mean that if you don't have any followers on Instagram, you're in trouble. It just means Instagram is not a calling card for you. It's not something that's going to pique an agent's interest, probably. What about literary journals, Stacey? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I haven't really, you know, Instagram has only come about since I have no longer work for a literary journal, but my gut would say that no, they don't. With that, they don't care. You know, they don't care at all, really. Even if you had a large platform, it's not gonna help get your story into the journal. It's almost always just about the story, because literary journals are not financial juggernauts making a lot of money. So they're big. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that.
Well, but we could also use this question, just in the little bit of time that we have left. I would say that you as a writer, you are such a a dream example, because you wrote a debut novel, right? You don't have 100,000 followers on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or any of these other places, and you engage with social media, but you engage with social media in the way that you like to and for your own joy, right? I mean, I imagine the closer it gets to your publication date, that'll change a little bit. But I guess the point of all of this is to say that I think there is a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves as writers, especially, in fiction, to have some sort of platform, when in fact you can just write a really great novel and get an agent excited, and that agent can sell it to a publisher, and that novel can still have some work to be done, and you can do that work and it can be published. So is there anything you want to say about your kind of approach as a writer or as an author now, to social media?
I mean, I was relieved. Like, I had an actual, like, straight out conversation about it with one of the, I don't know how it even came up, but one of the editors that I was talking to, in the process of selling my book. And they were like, we don't care. Like, we have great authors that have zero social media presence. We don't care at all. And maybe it was that editor that said to me, but someone said to me, social media only helps you if you love to do it already. Like, if you really love your Instagram feed and you're curating it in a way that it's, you're spending a lot of time in it, then that might be helpful. But if you're like most of us, like, and it doesn't bring you joy, then you're probably better off putting that time somewhere else. To like do it half-heartedly just to get more followers is probably not going to actually translate to any extra sales. Because people like, whether it's a book or an Instagram feed, right? You can tell when someone had fun doing something, and that's what makes you want to read it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Not sure if that was our last. Oh no, we have more questions. How can I find a female nonfiction reader that I can trust with a big idea? I have exhausted my friends and family and need someone unbiased.
Again, I think it's that thing of the best way to probably approach that, if you're looking for something unpaid, is in a like a quid pro quo kind of thing. Like, you're looking for somebody that maybe you are going to exchange work with each other, and to get feedback that way. Like, asking someone to read something for free, especially if you're putting something on it, like as a woman or as a person of a certain culture, is asking a lot, right? And so you want someone that you're going to have a relationship with, that you can be readers with each other, perhaps, if it's another writer. If you're really worried about like a big idea that you want to keep under wraps, then sometimes paying someone, it gives you that security, right? If you pay an editor to look at something, they're not going to take your idea. Like, that's just, there's professional ethics. If you just have a random person you give your book to, I don't think that idea theft is that common in general anyway, because there is like no new thing under the sun, right? But yeah. I don't know, you have more specific advice, Becca?
No, I think that's great. And Jessica on here asked about, or Jessica has offered herself up. So
oh, nice.
I think someone who might read. So I think
nice,
that,
Jessica.
yes, she has. So if anyone, maybe we'll try to make a writer connection after this. All right, I'm going to go back a little. So I have a few questions I want to follow up with you on really quick, Stacey, because there were questions that came up as we were talking. And I'm going to find them right now as I'm flipping through my notes. So someone did ask, how do you find a great writing group or critique partner? And, this is something that at the Writers League, we're really interested in trying to to explore facilitating, because it is something that a lot of folks ask us about often. But I guess, can you give some thoughts on just how your own writing group formed, or how you've seen other people find those writing groups and critique partners?
I think one thing that I always think is important, and when finding people that are good readers for you is often this lovely thing where you also like what they write. Like there's something interesting about the people that really respond to your work. You are like, you just share an aesthetic, right? And so you're responding to their work. So taking classes, like, those can be cheap online classes. There's a variety of places that do online classes now that are not like outrageously expensive. And those people don't have to be in the same city as you, but in taking a class where you're workshopping stuff, you get to read other people's work. And when you find someone that you really like what they're writing, approaching them and asking, like, do you want to continue to exchange work after this class is done, is a great way to start to kind of, or like sometimes I've had classes that have such great chemistry that as a class, they go on to be a writing group after that class is done, after our 10 weeks have finished. So I think that's always a really a nice way. It costs a little money because you're having to take a class, but usually it's not a great amount of money.
Mm-hmm. And if anyone out there has any ideas about ways that we could bring people together that wouldn't be, a tremendous administrative burden, but also might be, something that would be fun for you guys, send them my way. You can always email me. So then the other question that we had was, should a manuscript be professionally copy edited before sending it to an agent? Will an agent care if a manuscript has been professionally copy edited?
I don't think so. Like it, we all have our own grammar blocks, I think, like things that we don't do right. Like I put the wrong its. I always forget the apostrophe on the right its, just all the time. If your manuscript's 95% clean and you have occasional typos and stuff, like they're not going to care if they love the book like that. I don't think it's important enough to do it. If you know that you're someone that struggles with, like, you're a wonderful writer, but you just struggle with the grammar stuff, finding a friend that's good at grammar to read it for you, or hiring a copy editor is not a bad idea. But I think, if don't worry about like a half dozen, a dozen mistakes over a 300-page manuscript.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's not sloppy. I think there's a big difference between sloppy and there's some stuff that a copy editor, a professional copy editor might catch, but that agent might not even catch. So I would definitely agree with that. But I think also people just knowing themselves as a writer, so knowing what your strengths are and what maybe your challenges can be, is a great thing. And understanding, like, I'm just never going to be somebody who's going to spell color without a U, so someone's going to have to come behind me and knock the U out of there or what have you, is a great idea. So just getting to know yourself. All right, last question. Oh, I think that was the last question. So Stacey, thank you so much. Do you have any parting words for our lovely people?
No, I was just looking. I saw somebody said Dr. Stacey and Dr. Becca as well.
And nice. I think Jamie Netzer might be here. She just said thanks all. That might be our Jamie. It is her. What a good group on the old chat. So we're going to definitely send the list of books that Stacey mentioned out to you guys. If you have any extra questions, you're welcome to throw them into the chat box right now. But I do want to just mention that we will have our third Thursday next week. It's going to be a good one. And I really hope that you can be there. It's Writing Essays and Memoirs, Charlotte Gulick, Antonio Ruiz Camacho. Check out our YouTube page and, let us know what else we can be doing and how we can help you. Okay. And have a great night. I think that's it. Stacey Swann, you're the best.
It was so much fun. I take weird pleasure in answering questions. I don't know if that's a form of narcissism or what. So
I could listen to you talk all night. But no, that was really great. So
thanks for having me. I hope everybody has a great night and good luck on all of your revisions. And remember, it's supposed to take a long time. unfortunately.
Yeah, that's for
Take
sure.
your time. It's
We will line up to buy your book when it's available. All right, lady.
Good night, everybody.
See you later. Good night.